Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Crescendo, a podcast that amplifies the voices of women in business. I'm your host, Rachel Lubchansky, an entrepreneur turned business mentor and strategist, guiding women to build businesses that align with who they are at their core, the positive change they want to see in the world, and the financial security they desire. Join us as we amplify the voices of women and unravel the complexities and joys of building a business that ignites a life of purpose on purpose. I hope that the crescendo stories you hear on the show will inspire you, empower you, and guide you to step into the most authentic, full, and beautiful expression of your own voice as a business owner. Today's guest is Jess Sato. She is passionate about helping women globally use their unique skills, expertise, and voice to create opportunities for themselves and for others. As a speaker coach and business strategist, Jess guides female business owners, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs with a social purpose to hone in on their big ideas and boldly leverage them as their competitive advantage. And not on her bio, she is one of the kindest, brightest lights in our world. And without further ado, welcome, Jess. I am so happy to have you here on the show today.
Me too. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for our conversation. I love that you're doing this finally. This is so awesome.
Yes. Well, Jess knows me really well. Jess was one of my first clients. I want to venture to say like 7 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, six, maybe
20,
six, 2018.
2018. Okay.
2018.
And so much has changed
My
from
gosh.
those early days. You and I have both been on a journey. And we have continued to support each other through all of it. And I've just been tremendously grateful for your guidance, your thought partnership, and your kindness. You're just truly like one of the best. So you have an amazing story, and I would love for you to just start by sharing your background and how you came to the work that you're doing today.
Uh, I guess like probably many of the people that you have on this show, I started in corporate and, had the job. I had the plan, I followed the plan, and I got to that place where I'm like, looking at my life thinking, is this really all there is? And fast forward to, leaving that corporate job and doing some consulting work. I had a cookie and cupcake business in there. Um, but it wasn't until around 2017 that I started to feel like I needed to make some important shifts. And it started with spending basically a year in Ethiopia working with people there to really think about strategy and business growth. And it really reignited this passion I have for helping people grow and develop. And at the time, I was really focused more on leadership development, but a situation that happened toward the end of that time really put something in perspective for me. And long story short, I was really forced to reckon with, do I own this business? I was doing that as a consultant. And was I really operating like a business owner? And it became clear that I was really functioning more like a practitioner. And all the women around me were sort of doing the same thing. And I thought something is not quite right about this. Like, why are all these really amazing, powerful, smart women just sort of like not standing up for themselves in business, not advocating for themselves? And that led me down a path where I spent the next 3, 5 years really digging into what does it take to make a business grow? What does it take to really advocate for yourself in business? And funny enough, it was actually the dissolution of a business partnership that I really started digging into the power of our voice and self advocacy in a way that I had never done that before. And now, if I look back, I'm like, wow, this is so interesting how, like, you look at your own journey and you're like, oh, okay, I couldn't have put all those pieces together, but now it's so clear that through line. Um, but now the work I do is really rooted in how can we help women use their voice, as you said, to create opportunities for themselves and others. And I genuinely believe that entrepreneurship is the path for many, many women, especially if I start to think about global demographics and politics and a lot of other factors that are outside of our control. This is one of the things that we can control. And that really starts with being clear about what you're all about, what is your mission in business, and how can you use your unique perspective, point of view, big idea, whatever terminology you want to use, to really say the things that need to be said to shift the narrative in your business.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I think like that's really what helps business owners and entrepreneurs stand apart from somebody who's working in someone else's business, right? And so I
Yeah.
often think about how running a business is almost more of a personal development journey and personal growth experience than it is anything else. And I often wonder, like, how would I have found my voice had it not been for stepping out on my own? What are your thoughts
Yeah.
about that? Like, do you feel like women have the ability to fully express their voice, their opinions, their thoughts, their stance without building their own container?
That's a really good question. I mean, I feel like it would be like weirdly privileged to say no because many, many people don't have, I don't even want to say the luxury, but don't have the space or the margin in their lives to do that. Um, so I don't want to say no because I think you can create. I often say to my own clients, like, what's the stage of your own making? Where is your stage? And I think, social media and other platforms have opened the door for women to express themselves in ways that maybe previously they didn't have the container to do. But I definitely believe that building a business and by extension, the marketing and all the stuff that goes with it, where you really do have to be out there sort of tooting your own horn and saying the things that you really want to say and that need to be said. And there's a fine line there. Um, that is a huge element of how we grow in this space. And so yeah, it feels like if I think about my own career, would I have gotten to the place where I feel like I could confidently say what I want to say? I want to hope I could have, but I'm not sure if I really would.
Yeah, I think sometimes we're stifled by the spaces around us, by the other voices in the room. And I think whether you're in another organization or under somebody else's umbrella or even just in your own business, that idea really remains true for many of us. When I think about what gets in the way of us sharing our voices, so much of it harkens back to the mind drama, the thoughts that we're playing through our own minds, knowingly, subconsciously. And I think that mostly that's what holds us back. Can you think of anything else like that really gets in the way of being able to come out and fully express ourselves in the way that we envision or desire?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And actually, you know, if I think about sort of the previous question and this one combined, I'll use myself as an example. I mean, if you think about women who are in containers or in spaces, sometimes they don't have the luxury of saying it, right? Because you're like you said, under someone else's umbrella, or um, or you don't really understand the boundaries of what you can say. And I was in a business partnership for about 3.5 years, and in a container like that, saying what I wanted to say versus her saying what she wanted to say wasn't always on brand. And it creates this discord. So I think that's part of the challenge, like in professional context, where people feel a little bit stifled and limited in and allowing their true self to come out. I think you can find ways around that, but I know that was a big part for me. And so it wasn't until I got on the other side of that partnership that I recognized, like, wow, it wasn't that I was being inauthentic, but the fullest expression of myself wasn't really coming through. So I think that's one reason why, right? The
Can I,
container itself that you're in. Yeah.
yeah, can I actually ask you, like, what were the indicators? Because I can imagine someone's listening to this podcast and they're like, I sort of feel like that might be happening. Like, I feel like I'm sharing my
Mm.
voice, but maybe it doesn't feel fully authentic. What might be some of the indications that that's true for them? Or what
Yeah.
were them for you? What were they for you?
Yeah. For me, it was, I could feel this tension inside me. It's like maybe a slight disagreement over the way something was said, or the value, a series of values that you have are not quite being realized. And for me, it just manifested itself as a tension where I was looking at how I felt. I'm sure she was looking at how she felt. And probably neither of us were able to really, the vernacular I use now, say what we wanted to say. And so for me, it just manifested in a lot of tension and some friction about, like, well, if we say it this way, that doesn't feel authentic to me. And if you say it that way, well, it doesn't feel authentic to me. So there was just this tension, not so much between us personally, but more like, how do we do this and still be in a container? So I do think that that happens a lot, right? Because people are like bumping up against these feelings in their spaces. Like they want to have the hard conversation. They want to advocate for the thing, and they don't feel like they can because the container itself doesn't allow it. And so that it just manifests as this tension where you don't feel like, and I think if you've been there, and this would be so interesting if people like commented on this, right? But if you've ever been there, I think you know what that feels like, where it's like, I want to say this thing, but I don't feel like I can for any number of reasons. And I think sort of by extension, some of it's social conditioning and some of it is the container and self-preservation. I think for many, I mean, literally all time, right? There have been people, systems, structures that have conditioned us to be a certain way, to understand where we can. And it has, in some cases, been dangerous, personally, professionally, in life, like actual human life, to say or challenge the status quo. So I think, some of that is natural fear that comes into play. Um, you mentioned, people sort of worrying about what other people will think. And I think part of it too is like, what happens if I do say this thing and it explodes in a really good way? Like a lot of the people I work with, these are big thought leaders who have very established businesses, and them pushing the boundaries has the potential to blow the top off their business in really profound ways. And it's kind of scary, right? Because we get into this like comfort zone. So I think some of it's social conditioning, some of it is, fear of success, some of it's like fear of being canceled. I just wrote a whole blog series about this. Like people worry about, am I going to be penalized for saying the hard truth? Um, so I think there's just a whole lot of things that are in there that make it difficult for us to feel like we can say what we want to say, and also to kind of push that boundary when it is uncomfortable.
Definitely. And I just, the song that keeps playing through my mind right now is like, say what do you want to say and let the
Yes.
words. Okay. Yeah. So, but I want to go back to something that you said, which is like this visceral feeling, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's a full body experience. And the
Mhm.
more that I have learned about energetics, which I do not feel like an expert in by any stretch. Okay. But just in my light reading and light conversations, the more I learn about the energetics of the world and like the way that everything functions in the universe, I really believe that it starts within our own bodies and that we do have the answers many times within ourselves. And the challenge becomes learning how to listen. And I think we aren't taught when we're young how to do that. Certainly, you and I weren't in our generation, just for our listeners, we're like in our mid 40s. Um,
Mhm.
and there's so much value in learning how to identify what our bodies are telling us. So I really appreciate that you brought that up because I too have found that sometimes if I'll just sit back and sit with myself and let whatever it is that's looming, whether it's a question about how I've said something or haven't said something or what I want to say or whatever it might be, that I get a response. It's not like up here. It's not like,
Mhm.
yes, do the thing. It's not like a voice necessarily. It's just a feeling.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say just because it's really a powerful response
Mhm.
that we're looking for, but don't always know how to listen to it or listen what
And
to listen for.
yeah, and I think, part of the challenge it is there's a pressure to respond, right? I think a lot about, if we just think about like sort of like the nature of the state of the world that we're in, there's always this pressure to say something, to do something. And I think there's a lot of power in that. And in some places that makes sense because you have the kind of platform that warrants that. But there's also real power in the pause, in the quiet of saying nothing. And, I'm this is not like moving us into a political conversation, but I think you get what I'm saying, where, I think sometimes we feel like we have to say something. And actually the the power is in the not saying, is in the listening, is in the receiving. And that in turn allows us to be responsive to what is processing through us. And I I know for me, I'm about to do this coming weekend, going out in nature and being completely device free. I kind of embrace my inner dirt bag and like go out in the wilderness, and like that's when that quiet allows me to just be and to listen. And it's where I've had some of the most profound thinking, and my voice tends to come through in those spaces. So I think if we're talking about, as entrepreneurs, it feels like a lot of times we have to say something, we have to fill the gap. And I would say, don't fill the gap. Just pause and listen to what is happening inside you, and then listen to what's happening around you. And then you can make a decision about, is my voice needed in this space at this time?
Mm, yeah, so good. Okay, I want to move into talking about big ideas because
Mm.
you are really expert at helping to draw out the big ideas that people have within them. Can you talk about some of like what does that process look like? And also
Yeah.
what are some of the strategies maybe that you've used to bring your big ideas and your influence forward in this space?
Oh, I love this question. So I I am obsessed with big ideas. And I want to clarify first what I mean when I say big idea, because I think sometimes people think big idea has to be like this revolutionary thing. That's not really what I'm talking about. I think for most of us as business owners, we have a perspective about the way something is being done in our industry, in the world, whether that's the social impact kind of space, that's where a lot of my clients are, um, or just looking at trends that you're noticing and having a point of view or perspective about that. And usually that's rooted in our own experiences and our expertise. And in some cases, and I would argue in most cases, that is enough to, when you start talking about that, to shift the narrative. So for me, a big idea is anything that challenges the status quo. It really forces you to think about an issue, usually a thing that's happening that all of us are experiencing, a little bit differently. And when we do that, when we dig into that perspective, the experiences that have shaped it, that allows us to then have a different kind of conversation in the spaces that we're in. So the process that I take people through is very much just a conversation. They're doing some pre-work, of course, but the bulk of it is digging in and asking a lot of questions about how did you get to this place? How did you how did you come to this experience honestly? What was the event or series of events that caused you to start to look at this thing, issue, challenge, what have you differently? And so much so that I got to really thinking about what makes an idea big, because I get that question a lot. Like, how do I know if my idea is big enough? Because most of the time, you know, for our previous conversation, we're minimizing, we're, acting like the things that we think and do are just run of the mill kinds of things. When in reality, it's like, wow, actually, that's pretty profound. And so I came up with this acronym, almost like a lightning bolt. Is your idea bold? Like, does it require you to have some courage? Is it challenging the status quo? And you know that when you're saying something that is difficult to hear, when you're taking an unpopular position, when, anything like that, it brings up this sort of like ickiness inside you, even though you know it's the right thing to do. So I always say, like, does your thinking create a little bit of discomfort inside you? And if it is, you know that you're on the right track. Is it original? That's where, did it come to you honestly, like through an experience, through, a whole bunch of things? Is it loud? And I think this is the key. Does it cut through the noise of the marketplace? Right? Like, as business owners, we have to be thinking about the nature of our message, and our big idea is the foundation of that. So if you're saying the same thing as everybody else, it's just noise. It's just white noise. We need that like record scratch moment where you're like, what? I have never heard it said that way, or, something along those lines. And then is there this tenacity to it, right? Do you keep pursuing it because it's something you believe in deeply? So, you know, if I think about the work that I'm doing, I care a lot that women's voices are elevated. That came because I grew up in the Middle East. I know what it's like to be in spaces where women's voices are marginalized in religious spaces, et cetera. And so for me, I found myself with those experiences coupled with getting out of a business partnership where I recognized I wasn't using my voice fully. Those shaped this perspective I have that when we say what we really want to say, that we have the power to potentially change the world. And so that is not like some revolutionary idea. Like, there are many people, this whole podcast is dedicated to amplifying the voices of women, but you're doing it in a way that is completely your own. You're saying the kinds of things that really shift people's perspective or get them to think about it differently. And that to me is really the power of a big idea.
And I just wonder, like, how many people are actually thinking about this concept of a big idea, and if that's actually part of the equation for them of like, I need to do this thing, and it's really important that I get my voice out there. So what I want to talk about is like, what's at stake if they don't, right? To sort of awaken people to this idea that silencing your big idea, or just not even deliberately silencing it, but just not actively mining for it, actually has
Yeah.
risks.
I mean, I don't want to be trite about it, but if I think about the work my clients are doing, work in some cases your clients are doing, I mean, we're talking about actual human lives that are at stake, you know? Um, a lot of the women I'm working with are challenging narratives and industry standards that are costing human lives. So on the extreme end, I think what's at stake are humans. If I bring it down, because not everybody is doing like true life altering work in that way. it feels to me like when you are, how do I want to say this? When you are not doing the hard work of excavating and allowing your thought leadership, your big idea to shine through, the impact of what you're trying to create is just less than it really could be. So, if we're really talking about making a difference in the lives of the people we work with in the communities in which we live, work, and serve, to not say what you want to say. And I don't use that term lightly, right? But to not say what you want to say, you are not going to have the impact. Your business isn't going to have the impact. Your clients aren't going to get the full impact of what could be. And the question I often ask people, especially if they're sort of sitting on the precipice and they're like, well, I'm not sure if I had a big idea. The question I always ask is, what in the world would change if you said what you wanted to say? The world is in desperate need of women's voices right now. We are in an area and time where the voices that, have been the loudest have gotten us into places that are not good across the board, globally, at every level. So that means we need different voices. And women have a very unique and powerful way of serving their communities. And so it feels, again, not to be trite, but it just feels like we're doing the world a disservice when we are unwilling to do the hard work and digging into and figuring out, what is my big idea? What is my unique take on this issue? What do I see that's happening in the world? And I'm like, that is messed up. We need to do differently. I don't agree with fill in the blank. And you don't have to do that in a hostile or provoking or attacking kind of way. You bring in your values and the why behind it. And that to me is where the richness comes into the conversation. Like, that's what people are hungry for. They want depth. They don't want, just a cute catchphrase here or there. They're looking for the meat behind why you're doing what you're doing. So to me, I guess the simple answer is, at the far extreme, it's human lives. And on a more local level, it's, we're just not going to have the impact and create the kind of result that we really want to have for ourselves in our own business and in the lives of our clients.
It's really good. And I want to just highlight that question that you asked, which is, what changes? What becomes possible? What changes if you said what you wanted to say?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a great question for all of our listeners to just sit with. Grab a journal, your favorite pen, sit down in a quiet space with yourself and think about what changes if you said what you wanted to say. And I often like to think about both, you just brought up like the concept of the why, which is really what that question is getting to somewhat to the root of. And there's like this internal and this external, right? What changes for us? What changes for ourselves, for our families, for those closest to us, right? In our inner circle? What changes in our lifestyle? What changes for those around us? What changes for those we're serving? And how does all of that impact the world? What happens if you inspire the next woman to take action, right? And then that becomes then the container for shaping their families. I mean, it's huge when we really stop and think about the breadth of and the scale of the impact that each one of us can create.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this phrase many, many times over the years. When you don't share your big idea, when you're not saying the things, when you're not showing up fully, right? You're essentially robbing the world of what could be. And I don't want to be a part of that. I want to, like you said, be a part of creating this really powerful ripple effect. And I think sometimes we underestimate. In fact, I don't even think we sometimes, I think most of the time, women in particular underestimate the impact of their voice. And I can think of countless examples where I was minimizing, thinking like, oh, this is obvious. This is so, everybody knows this. When in reality, they don't. So I do think that, we have to get to a place, as uncomfortable as it might be, to say the hard thing.
For sure. And I think if you just imagine the one person who's next out there for you to impact, for you to support, for you to help with whatever's going on for them, right? Whether it's that they're looking to launch their own business, they're looking to become a speaker, they are looking to heal from some sort of trauma, they are looking to support others in some other way. Like, think about the one person and how supporting them and showing up in your brilliance just shapes their life. And then all the lives. Like, I think when we get to that place where we imagine the trickle down effect, we realize the breadth and the scale of the impact that each of us can create. Thank you so much for that. Jess, you're
Yeah.
so amazing.
I
It's such a pleasure
I
to
I
talk
just
about all this stuff. I feel like we could just talk for hours.
we could. We could. I'm feeling so fired up because I just, like you, I really want women, and it just goes back to what I said before. The world is in desperate need of women's voices. And anything I can do, and I know you feel the same, to encourage, empower, equip women to boldly step into this place where they are saying what they want to say. That's where the magic is. And I know it's scary. I know it's hard, but it makes all the difference in the world. And I think when we embrace that, that's where the magic really happens.
Definitely. Love that. It's a great way to wrap. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing all of your wisdom and experience and just your heart with us. I'm so happy. I want to ask you one final question, which is something I ask all my guests. And that is, what is one tip you have for other women who are striving to honor their authentic voice in business?
It's such a good question. Um, I think it stems from a lot of what we talked about here, but I think on a very practical level, if you are looking at your business and you're thinking, okay, I'm not sure I really have a big idea. If you're really questioning, like, can I really make an impact? Is my work really that important? I'm going to encourage you to answer the question that we already asked. That's one thing. What in the world would change if you said what you wanted to say? And then I want you to bring your personal board of directors into that conversation. Because in and out, if we're just listening to ourselves, sometimes, you know, it's easy to just push it down and say, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. But when you share that big idea with other people, when you really allow that passion to come through and you bring your most trusted people around you and ask them, what stands out about this idea? What are you hearing that is impactful here? Um, what should I be saying that I'm not saying? Like, that's where we start to see, like, oh, okay, maybe my idea isn't so obvious. Maybe it's not so, rote or what have you. Um, so I would say, ask yourself, do the inner work, get quiet, and then bring others in to help you find the courage, find the words themselves to actually put it out in the world. Because that's, like I said, that's where we start to see real change happen. Um, and it's a really beautiful thing.
It sure is. Thank you so much, Jess. How can people find you online and connect with you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, well, you can find me on my website, jessicasato.com. And I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and Instagram. And you can find me under Jessica Sato.
Wonderful. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of Crescendo. If this episode struck a chord or generated some sort of an insight that you'd like to capture, we would love it if you would share, comment, and like this episode. And of course, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss future shows and so that we can all go out and keep sharing our voices. Have a great one.